you need to make sure you have learned how to block in the drawing or draw the basic outlines of the shapes of the objects. You can use a light table or a window to trace onto large paper, or you can block in the drawing by measuring intuitively. The light tables are underneath the counter by the window and should be labeled. You can use an electrical outlet on that counter, or you can take a light table to a desk close to the electrical drop-downs from the ceiling and use the light table at one of the desks in the classroom. When you select a drawing, you can use a grid to block in your object if doing it intuitively or eyeballing the measurements is not working. I would also suggest asking your instructor to help you alter the image in Photoshop if you don't know how to do so, as this will simplify the image so you can draw it easier. Print the image 8 by 10 or smaller. The first thing to realize when you block in a drawing or drawing the outlines for your objects is that you need a reference so your brain and hand have an easier time creating a representation of what you want to draw. The reference image will either be a live object or a photograph. When you initially draw this in your sketchbook, it's recommended that you draw it quite small, about the size of half of a 3 by 5 index card or 1.5 inches by 3 inches. You can either trace the card or use a ruler to draw that box in your sketchbook. Make sure that you draw lightly, rather quickly, and without value. All you're trying to do is capture the outlines in this thumbnail sketch. Part of the reason we call it a thumbnail sketch is that the sketch is very small and done very quickly, with just the outlines and no value. The thumbnail should be a pretty close representation of what will be on the larger paper. Here you can see the large drawing next to the thumbnail sketches, and it's very close to being the same as the original sketch. Notice that the larger drawing is hard to see because it was drawn lightly. This is always how you should start your drawing so you can erase any mistakes that you might make. When you are blocking in the thumbnail, you should be looking at the image you are trying to draw. Often this is a live object in class, but you can also use a photograph that is printed out or even your cell phone, as it will give you a reference for what you are trying to accomplish. Printing a photo will make it easier to draw. Some people may be able to block in their shapes quickly with no guide, as they have more than likely drawn before and can measure intuitively. That's great. But if you are new to drawing, you may want to break the sketch and the larger paper into 4 smaller squares to make it easier to draw. I normally refer to this division like it's a math graph, as it makes people understand that they are measuring as they do this. It's also easier to compare a quadrant of your photo to a quadrant of the thumbnail on your paper. The same is true when you use the composition of the thumbnail to block in on your larger paper. You would take one quadrant of the thumbnail and replicate the shapes in that quadrant on the larger sketchbook page. To divide your paper, take a ruler and measure across the sketchbook. Here it is 9 inches. Divide that in half and make a small mark vertically where the halved number is. Then slide the ruler up the sketchbook and make another mark at the same halfway point. Once you have those 2 lines, you can use the ruler to create a straight vertical line. Make sure to keep the ruler perpendicular to the paper as you do this by keeping the whole numbers lined up across the edge of the paper. Do the same thing horizontally on the paper. You should also make these divisions on the printed photo. Once the lines are drawn on both the sketch and the larger paper, you can start drawing the shapes you see in the thumbnail onto the larger paper. Make sure you are still looking at the object in the photo or the live object to ensure that you draw the shapes correctly, as you were sketching quickly with the thumbnail and may have made mistakes. If these squares are not small enough to make you accurate, you can divide the squares in half again. What you are trying to do is compare the shapes you are drawing from the thumbnail with where they are on the sketchbook page. Hopefully you notice that you are starting to make a grid if you do that. This is another presentation if you want to make your drawing even more accurate. When you are done, you need to erase the grid lines that you drew before you start adding color or value so the grid lines don't show in the finished drawing. It shows good craftsmanship to do this. Remember, craftsmanship is the skill in which you are making your drawing. The grid lines would distract from the objects, so you need to erase them. You can then start adding color or value to add contrast so you can see each object in your image. There will be another video to show how to do that.